hello again, and welcome to today's webinar, Measuring Success and Future Opportunity with ArcGIS. This is the latest in our 2018 series of webinars on market development. Allow me to do a few introductions. My name is Kathleen Ojo. I'm the Commercial Programs Lead here at Esri, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined once again by Helen Thompson, our Commercial Industry Manager and a lifelong advocate for using spatial information to open up new opportunities for business. Today we're also joined by Jim Harries, a geographer with Esri here at Redlands, California. Every day he makes maps that help others improve their maps by eliminating the noise and increasing the signal. His emphasis is on thematic mapping and map visualizations, no doubt due to a love of numbers, statistics, math in general, and spatial analysis in particular. Thank you for being here today, Jim. Let's go over a few logistical points before we jump into today's content. This webinar is being recorded, and we try to post the recording on LinkedIn within 10 days. Make sure you join one of our industry-specific special interest groups so you don't miss the recording or any of the other content or announcements we post. Questions will be hosted at the end of the webinar. Please type them into the question window in your GoToWebinar dashboard. There's a link here to our Market Development Webinar Series page, where you can catch up on any sessions you've missed, as well as a link to an ongoing survey we're conducting that asks about the type of market analysis you need to support your business goals. We'll send out an email immediately following the webinar with these links as well. If you've been here before, you know that we launch lots of polls and surveys during and after these webinars. We encourage you to please take the time and give us your input. Your responses are fed directly to our software development teams, so this is your opportunity to influence our software and solutions through 2019 and beyond, so don't hold back. Your feedback's really important to us. Later, Helen's going to be revealing some new functionality that came directly from your requests. Now, let's get started. Today's webinar is titled Measuring Success and Future Opportunity, but an alternate title might be Market Development's Greatest Hits or The Best of 2018. This is the 6th webinar in our series, which started with an overview of what a market development strategy looks like, and then delved deeper into each step of the process. Ground truthing your assumptions, prioritizing resources, establishing common understanding across the organization, and sharing information with your stakeholders. Today, we're going to revisit many of the workflows we've covered in previous webinars, but this time with the focus on the metrics. By now, you're on board with using location data to inform your strategy. You've created the dashboards and visualizations you need, and information is pouring in. Now, how do you determine whether your strategy is working? What are the indicators of success that you should keep your eye on in order to determine if you're on the right track or if you need to pivot? That's what we're going to focus on today. We'll apply what we've learned so far to find new opportunities that we haven't had the skills or awareness to find before. Once you've identified how you want to measure success, we'll show you how to automate your reporting against those metrics and develop workflows that work for your organization so that relying on data and analysis over gut feeling becomes muscle memory for you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Helen, who will cover our agenda for today. Helen?
All right, thanks, Kathleen, and welcome everybody, whether you're live here today or you're watching the recordings. So I want to really emphasize what Kathleen's just pointed out and highlighted. This is kind of the best hits, and when we were planning this in terms of our 2018 strategy, one of the things we really realized is we need to bring all of this stuff together. So I want to share some things about the organizational value chain. We discussed the importance of collaboration, getting information together, but it's also about delivering it in a form that everybody can use. We're going to look at space and time, a really powerful capability to help not just visualize data, but to analyze information in such a way that you're using the third dimension and the fourth dimension to really start to understand why things are happening and how they're happening. I often use the expressions, something happens somewhere, but probably a better use of it is actually that everything happens somewhere because of where it happens. And what I mean by that is the fact of being somewhere and the context of that location affects what does happen. And space and time is a really good way to show that. We're going to discuss the idea of enabling the executive user, right? We think of this as the analytics consumer as part of all of this work. And we're going to investigate the sort of the demographics of opportunity. I'm really excited to have Jim as part of this because one of the things that he's going to show is the work as a cartographer to really look at smart mapping. And I'm going to highlight some of the cluster analysis tools that came out of ArcGIS Pro and into this September release of ArcGIS Online. We're going to be doing this without a safety net. We're going to show some of the new business analyst reports, the multi-area comparison table. And I've taken that and I've cooked up my own example. We're going to look at insights and dashboards and some of the new filters as part of that. And then finally, some look at sharing and how we make all these metrics work. So to start, what I would really love to know is who are you, right? What are your interests? As Kathleen said, what are the things which are important for you as part of market development?
And part of knowing that is knowing which industry you're from. It really helps us to tailor the workflows and the visualizations that we develop for the kind of work that you're doing. So thanks again for your input. We'll let that run for another few seconds. Awesome. All right, thank you for everybody who has participated. We'll go ahead and share out the results real quick. Looks like 47% of you are from the real estate industry, which about lines up with what we've noticed so far. I noticed quite a lot select other too. So I know these webinars, we attract a wide audience from a lot of different industries in the private sector and beyond. So it's really great to see you all here. Thanks again for participating.
All right, well, thank you. And so this is a data set that I'm going to use throughout today, and Jim's also going to use. It's something that we showed in the previous webinar. It's a classic CRM data set, 14,000 customers with information about their purchase history, their relationship with the store, how they bought information, how many boxes were shipped to them, the shipping method, the purchase method, all of these different things are included as part of this data set. It's a great data set for analysis and use, and we're happy to supply this, make it open for any of you on the webinar that want to use this to learn how to do the sort of techniques that I'm going to show. And this data set contains a lot of information that we really want to make available to people in quite a different way. As an analyst, I'm happy to explore this information and build my own internal information products, to use tools like ArcGIS Online here, or desktop or business analysts to do my day-to-day work. But that isn't really how many people want to consume this data. What we really see is this idea of the organizational enterprise. We have different roles as GIS analysts, a data analyst, an industry expert. I'm a little bit of all three, but not very good at any one of them. We have data scientists who really understand the analysis, and people understand the business in the same way. And all of their insight flows up to the decision maker. But we know that from the GIS analyst to the industry analyst, their knowledge of spatial data, geographic analysis, the importance of where varies. And that varies across the organization and up, and often success partners outside the organization that might be bringing in data are even less involved. So we think about these roles, a data creator, somebody that produces information. They typically share it with other people that are going to curate the data and how that data is shared and the information within it with other groups. And we think of these as data consumers, often the executives, line of business managers, people that are doing their day-to-day work. And of course, there's this simplicity equation. Creators like complexity and all of the information. Consumers value simplicity. Less is more to this organization, because when we have simpler data, when we move away from big data to small facts and insights, the value increases. So all the work we do in measuring should really sort of be focused on this type of paradigm. So we'd also like to know a little more about you in the audience. What type of person within your organization are you? Are you a creator? Are you a curator or a consumer of information? And one of the things that's obvious is that you can be all three.
All right, thank you, everybody.
We'll leave the poll open for a moment. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. It looks like a lot of responses are coming in. It looks like it's spread really evenly across the board, and it looks like we have a lot of people who have more than one function when it comes to their use of data. Let's give that another couple seconds. Okay, it seems like we've plateaued there. Let's go ahead and close out this poll. We'll share it back. All right, so 74% of respondents say they consume data in one way or another, but 71% curate that data. Only 65% have some function in creating the data. But still, just based on our attendees and these percentages, it looks like most of you are involved in more than one function.
And that's pretty much what we would expect in the modern business, and particularly in the small and medium-sized enterprise or the fast-moving large organization. You know, we've been empowered by technology to more and more self-serve with data and provide sort of exploratory analysis. And of course, the web has made it easier for us to reach out and grab data. And as a consequence, many of the barriers that have historically been put in place, siloing of data, siloing of sort of decision-making, they're actually being broken down. And one of the things that I'm really excited about the geospatial industry, both those that are in it full time and those which are touched by it, is the fact that we have historically always focused on breaking down those barriers. So this poll validates what many of us have known for years. And I want to show why this sort of is important in terms of the metrics as an introduction to this data, because many of us work with people that use traditional BI tools, and the data just arrives. And what we see a lot of is dots on maps like this. This is our customer database. And people go away and they make heat maps of the data. And those heat maps are powerful visualization, and people then talk about there's a cluster in downtown LA and there's all these things happening through essentially visualizations of data which are performed in the browser. So as you zoom in, those clusters change because, you know, they're not really clusters at all. They're just ways that we're showing the distribution of information. But what if we start to think about the data in a slightly different way? We actually aggregate up to zip codes. That's a great way, and we often see this, you know, choropleth maps, color-coded maps. They're often even called heat maps for data. And people are producing counts of points. So here, we've used a smart mapping technique to not just use choropleth maps, but actually to start to try and add some intelligence as part of that. I don't need to be a cartographer to use it. I immediately know that the average number of customers per zip code is 16, and the system is taking care of color coding that. And it's a pretty good display to know where I've got a large distribution of customers. I don't have to worry about them when they're in blue, purple. But all the areas in red, I don't have a lot of customers, and maybe I should be concerned about that. And we can aggregate data up. We can measure things like hotspots. One of the great tools in ArcGIS is the hotspot analysis. And we can start to see for this data, where are these hotspots? But having a technique like that isn't necessarily valuable if we're just creating hotspots of things which are aggregations and sum. So while I've summed up price, this is actually a function of the fact that I've got lots of customers that live there that are spending a lot of money. But what if I look at the hotspots in terms of average price? If I take all of my customers and say, across the area, how much do they spend? And do they spend differently in different locations within San Francisco Bay? And the answer is no. For all of my customers, they're really boring, whether you're in Cupertino or downtown San Francisco or Oakland, they pretty much behave the same. But it's also a function of geography. In some places, I have a low number of customers. Other places, I have a high number of customers. So what I need to think about is, where are the concentrations? So if I look at my penetration rates and use geographic hotspots, I can measure my effectiveness in each one of these different markets. And now I get a very different pattern, because what I start to see is, in terms of my penetration and where my customers are, they're behaving differently. So what we've done is we've applied geographic methods and geographic analysis to move beyond the simple metrics that many of the BI and these exploratory tools provide, to start to use the power of geography. What I want to do is I want to introduce Jim, who's going to take some of that data in a specific role and start to apply it in different ways.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. I'm going to spend a little time with this data set, and we're going to start by looking at how to change the style to do a little bit of discovery. We like to recommend that people, when you get a map, you ever seen a map like this before, where you've got a lot of dots on the map? There's so many dots on the map.
It's my favorite way of showing it.
It looks like grapes, and yet if I click somewhere in there, you know, I just clicked on 12 customers, or over here there's 14 customers. And the point, I guess, is that there's so much information, these dots are actually obscuring what's going on. And one of our inspirations for implementing what we call our smart mapping approach in the online experience of data is we want to make your life easy to kind of explore the data, discover different dimensions, kind of make it relatively frictionless to think about what's on screen. So the first step is always, hey, if you're interested in an attribute, you can just pick one, and you can select it and say, I'm kind of interested in how price varies in this data set on the map. You know, maybe there's some areas of town that spend a little more on a per transaction basis. And so what smart mapping does is it says, hey, I'm going to give you the histogram of your data. I'll zoom in on the interesting bit. And notice what happens to the map as I move this handle around. Now, what am I actually doing here? I'm just telling it, look, we're going to give an 8-point symbol size to anybody whose price was less than $1. I don't want to be in that business, so let's set that at $100. So now you only get a small dot if you were a relatively low priced thing, and you're only going to get a big dot based on where I, as the author, kind of decide. And it could be that I'm just experimenting, I'm trying to get a sense of things, or it could be that we've been issued a corporate goal that involves price point of, you know, we're trying to move some merchandise that is at a $5,000 price point. So behooves us to show that on the map. And once we have injected our knowledge into that histogram, into those settings, now we can pay attention to color, and it's going to work with our knowledge of the industry in order to bring the map to life a little bit. So what I mean is now we've got kind of big green grapes going on, and if we want, we can take advantage of things like transparency so that I can see through the dots to start to get a sense of density of things. They've also put into the product this little clustering button, which when you see 1 or 2 clicks in, it'll go out and assess all those dots on the map, and then it'll bring back clusters. And you can decide, well, how many clusters do I want? Do I want a lot of clusters so that I can poke at any one of them, and it'll kind of summarize, hey, there's 4 features, there were 4 sales here, and the average price was $4,000. Out here near Tracy, there was only 1 sale. So in a case where there's only 1 sale, we don't cluster it, we just give you the point. And that works at multiple scales, so the map is constantly helping you sort of understand the big picture or the little picture, depending on the scale you're at. Close that for a second. And the other way to kind of work with this, I'll turn clustering off. And then I think earlier it was mentioned there's a heat map option. So if I'm still focused on price, and if I want to see kind of a heat map of price, I could choose that option. Pause. We'll edit this all out, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
The web's going slow.
just waiting for the internet to respond here. You did mention we're working without a net. Anything I can close up there?
Just exit that page and come back in.
Allow me to demonstrate the resilience of a web map platform. If things go wrong, you can start over right where you were. So we're back here at the customers. My intent was to show you how to do a heat map quickly. It's 2 clicks away from that layer. And we get a quick sense that, probably as expected, downtown San Francisco has a little more activity than other areas. If we want to vary, the look and feel of that heat map, it's just a couple of clicks to kind of say, I want sort of a rainbow treatment with yellow. Let's put yellow at the edge, and we'll put let's put, yellow at the edge, and darker colors are towards the top. You can work with that just to get it the way you want it to look. The advantage of this is, compared to the dots, it's a great way to get people who are relatively new with mapping, get them comfortable with the fact that, just because you see a bunch of dots on the map doesn't mean we've found the pattern yet. The other great way to find pattern in the data is to, I wanted to show this, is to find the relationship among the variables. So for decades, the way mapping worked was you'd pick a variable like this, and a map would respond and show you price on the map. But sometimes the best maps are found in between 2 columns of data. So in this case, price and cost, I happen to know, have a relationship to one another that many people find valuable to understand the relationship between the price we're selling at and our true cost. And with just a couple of clicks, I choose this map style called compare A price to B cost. And right away, the map kind of responds and says, okay, well, I'm just doing the math, price divided by cost as a ratio. Okay? And what's interesting about that is we might have some subject matter knowledge that says, when price to cost is at a ratio of 1 to 1, in other words, I'm not making any profit, that's kind of a bad thing. It happens from time to time from sale to sale, but if it's an overall trend, wouldn't it be nice if the map would kind of light up? I'm going to use this color palette where green's on top, where price is much greater than cost. And this is kind of a profitability map. Now, it'd be nice to have margins of 490%. I think I'd enter that business, but I think it's more likely people would be happy with, 70% margin. Maybe you want to drop it to on the low side. We're going to light up this map. So you see what I'm doing is I'm telling the map, right, that these are the points at which I want you to light these sales up. And I'll show you how this all kind of builds nicely. I can then say, cluster that. And it's going to go off and it's going to create a little invisible grid on the map, and it's going to count up all the sales within each grid cell, and it's going to do the math and symbolize that. And what I like about that is it's going to allow me to understand at a more detailed level, unless the internet's grumpy today, which it could be. What it's going to allow me to do is kind of understand the relationship between these two things in a way that I normally would not. So it's going to fight me right now. That's fine. We'll move on to a more reliable method I recommend called aggregation. In this case, ahead of time, Helen pre-calculated, took the zip codes and took these customer locations and said sum up all the detail of that data within each zip code. And the reason that's valuable is I can then just pick what I'm interested in. Maybe I want to see, well, what's the average price? How does the average price of all sales in each zip code vary across time or across space? And I could pick, a high to low pattern where I kind of say, I'm interested any place in that the average price was $200. I'd like you to color that in yellow. And any place that's at $1,000, I'd like you to color that in a dark blue. And the histogram is right here to tell you, well, the average zip code has sales of about $641. So I can very quickly say, I'm going to drag this up to about 641, or I'll just hand type it in. And now anything in blue is above average. Anything in yellow is at or below average. But what you appreciate about this map is a little detail, like this particular zip code, the average price is, let's see, average price on this one. Am I missing it there? Oh, wait, maybe it's just not turned on. So the average price on that one is just below 600, or just above $641. That's why it's just a little bit blue, right? It's not a hard edge. If I were to classify, notice my values, 1,000 and 641. If I were to do a strict classification of this and say I'm going to use 3 classes, and I'm going to set this at 1,000 and this at 641. Now I have only 3 colors on the map. That's it. And so they're all being treated exactly the same. Now there's times to do that where this map is saying there's no difference at all between a sale of $14 and a sale of $640. We're going to color them all the same. There's reasons to do that. Maybe you got a policy reason or some other like declared reason why it doesn't matter. But I always recommend you as the analyst uncheck that option and just let the data breathe a little bit and then inject your knowledge about, well, if we look at the map from this perspective, this is where the smarts come from when we talk about smart mapping. And as I said earlier, sometimes the most interesting maps come from the relationship between 2 things. So if I take the sum of dollars in each zip code, so what was the total spend in each zip code, and I take, I don't know, the total population, there's a relationship between those 2 things. Now, I don't have these in the right order, and I'm not a programmer, so I'm really grateful to have this little switch attributes button that just flips them over like a numerator and denominator. So I'm now looking at dollars divided by people, and if I choose this A to B style again, the map instantly responds, giving me a little bit of visual feedback on, okay, are you interested in a map like this, the ratio of dollars to population? Yeah, and then we start to look at, okay, well, the average is 1.7, and the 1 standard deviation above the mean is $9 per person. And we've got some noise in our data, don't we? Unless we're doing a lot of refunds somewhere, which we probably need to know about. But I'm going to ground this map at 0, at a nice round figure. I call it CEO friendly figure of $2 a person. And then again, as always, whether you use our interface or someone else's, this is how maps work. When you inject your special knowledge about what is a meaningful figure, at what value should this map be lit up in purple, or we like profitable, so we'll do the green to purple. Now I've got a map that has a chance of communicating a little bit better about what's going on in the area. Now you might be wondering, Jim, how can you ruin this map in just a couple of clicks? I'll show you. Throw it on the most colorful base map you can find, right? I've made some effort here to define a map in simple terms. Green is good, purple is not as good. One way to kind of wreck your maps is throw them on, imagery. Because imagery is, by default, very dark, has lots of varied greens and other colors. It's just a struggle for that map to come through, even more so when you do things like show some transparency or something. So, if I think, oh, this might be good, well, that might be too transparent. This might be good. What we recommend, bottom line is, if you're making a thematic map about most business data, unless you're showing the locations of stores only just for a locator app, usually throw it onto a neutral background. You might throw it on a dark background like this. That's sometimes good for dramatic boardroom type presentations. Sometimes it's a little hard to make the colors work as well as on a light gray canvas. This is why the demo started this way. But those are just some of the skills. I could actually spend the rest of 2 hours talking to you about other advanced skills and going back on those one or two things that didn't quite work right the first time. Anything I left out there?
No, this is perfect. And one of the things that in the questions at the end, if you guys want a session on this type of cartographic representation for executives, tell us, because we'll get Jim back and we'll spend an hour on this type of thing.
That'd be fantastic.
All right. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and continue with this idea. So the big thing for Jim was to present information in a way that an executive can understand it. Often this is about curating information. So if we think about change often occurs over time. So there's a great tool to allow you to visualize two different data sets side by side. And we've taken, in this case, a heat map, and we've looked at how things are changing. So we're looking at the difference in spend, and I can explore the spend and these two maps synchronize. Right? This is a great way of not just measuring the metrics, but then actually discovering the patterns and say, what do I now need to understand from that data? I can explore it in another ready-to-use app, which is the magnifying glass. It's one of my personal favorites, right? We can go and look inside and look through one of the data sets and see what's happening below that. And the reason for doing this is to start to think about the metrics that are really important. Jim showed you the idea of these sort of fuzzy edges, right? So when you see a number like 2 or 1.9, 5.63, one of the things we really want you to understand is you should question that. What's the standard deviation? What's the range? What does it mean? Many people aggregate and classify data and produce metrics and measurements that people don't understand. And so I might want to take this data set and say, well, how have they changed? Not the absolute number, but the relative number associated with that. And how do these patterns change over time? One of the really powerful things is to take and build this into space-time cubes. So we've taken the same data and we've built a space-time visualization, and I'll share the link to this that you can explore it. Each one of these slices is a monthly slice up through the data. And in exactly the same way that Jim showed, you can model how this data is expressed. So I can move these sliders down in terms of the total monthly spend on each one of those areas and start to target the information that I want. One executive might be looking to say, find me all the areas where the monthly average spend of my target group of customers is $100. and it's no more than $250. And we can highlight that range. This becomes a really powerful technique because we're looking at lots and lots of data over both time and space. And another tool allows us to integrate the same visualization into a map. It's a brand new capability that came in the September release of ArcGIS Online. It allows us to put a map in for reference, pan around the map, move the view, and see where we are on the map. And you can see this little cursor moving as part of as we track around the map and analyze it. In this environment, it's just view only. I can click on it and see the information associated with it, and I can give this type of view for other people to perform their metrics. I can take data from many different areas and overlay it. So I could take a layer which is, our sales history in January, overlay that with February, but I can also take other layers like the educational attainment from a GED to a graduate degree, and make those layers in our 3D visualization. And I can combine data on top of them. And all of this information we can take into things like insights. We showed you insights last month and how we can bring this information together and bring powerful visualizations. As an analyst, I'm happy to use dots on maps and show the connectivity because I'm exploring information. But I also want to be able to take my knowledge and my metrics and measure things which are important and share that with people. So you asked us to help with things like filtering. In the September release, what we did is add advanced filters to data. So any of the metrics you can filter on. If I want to filter by zip code in my stores data, I can do that. If I want to filter any of the attributes for my customers from all of this information is available to me too. I can build my own features and filters within that. I can create predefined filters. So my workflow, I can come back again and again and again. So I built a couple of these, things like, who uses coupons and who does it affect in terms of my customers? I can take this and use that to segment data. I can build a whole range of different ways that we think about data. So as I come and measure information, I can use this to generate change because all of these data sets are creating rules and derived analysis. Any of these dashboards I can take and share. Again, a new feature was publicly sharing these dashboards. So if you want to copy down the link at the end of the webinar, you can play around with the data that I've just created. It's interactive in terms of being able to click on any of these capabilities like the payment method, coupons. We can bring together the type of insight analysis that Jim showed. And also all of those predefined queries, we can just load into the dashboard and start to look at how they affect our operations. All of this information we can bring into things like business analysts and start associating it with other information like tapestry and where our customers are located. We're very familiar in most cases with the tapestry segments and how they relate and the feedback and interactivity of the dashboard. But often what I want to do is I want to find a way to start segmenting data down. I want to be able to set those limits and get more idea of how things vary across time and space and the target locations. I want to take my information on my customers and start to aggregate it in many, many different ways. So we added a new capability into Business Analyst to make it easier to do side-by-side comparisons. I've taken the principles that we just looked at for San Francisco and analyzing a store in Calamasa. It's a tractor supply location, and I've generated a 5, 10, 15-minute drive time around it. I can bring all the metrics and measures that I'm interested in terms of my analysis into Business Analyst. And so for the first time ever now, I can compare this data side by side. So I can start to, when I move over a feature, I have the interactivity of seeing what are my different attributes. I can click on or highlight any one area in any one of my tables. So here I've got more than 20 different variables that I'm filtering. It automatically detects that there are 2 different counties that my area overlaps, and I can compare them. I can go in and filter this information. So for example, I can say I need a customer base of a particular size. Let's say what I want to do is have where it's more than 15% of the population earns more than $100,000. And it automatically filters the table. So now I know that the 5-minute drive time doesn't meet that criteria. So I can use these types of tools to explore and analyze information, to build metrics, to combine and overlay data together. One of the great things about this is it also allows me to summarize or view the data in things like charts and tables. So when we go and look at here, I can now start to compare the data side by side and do visual comparison. But I want to do more than this. What I want to do is to take those attributes and make them part of my analysis stream. So going back to our CRM data, one of the ideas that I have that Jim might be able to consume is this idea that I have clusters. What I want to do is I want to find places with more than 10 customers within a mile. These are clusters of opportunity, and my metric isn't just the numbers, the dollars, the price. It's actually how my customers are dispersed. But I could also do clustering based on those attributes like sales. So here they all are. And what I can do with these clusters is I can also find the signal from the noise. So we will tell you where these clusters are significant. So these are all of the customers that meet those criteria. And we can go further with this and start to look at things like dispersion. So what dispersion is it'll generate an envelope if you want an optimal trade area for each one of those locations. So now I can start to see where my trade areas, my opportunity is in respect to all of those customers. I've got 90 possible locations which are clustered, and I can see the variation in size. I can bring together a whole range of metrics to try to start to understand those customers better and differently. I can take any one of these informations and start to do things like buffer them. So we can now make a shape and dissolve them and say, well, what are these actually now if every customer is within half a mile, one of our conditions of clustering? We can take information and enrich them, things like the tapestry information, and start to see in exactly the same way that Jim demonstrated these relationships. So in this case, what I'm seeing is clusters of population based on tapestry code, which is the colors, and the average household income, which is the size of the circles. This is a visual relationship, but we can start to measure and monitor how those are affected over time and space. And a great tool for doing that is obviously Business Analyst. I can take the same map with my drive times or with my clusters or any type of formal, informal geography and bring it into Business Analyst. I simply go to the Add Data, Web Maps, add it in, and it's automatically available to perform infographic analysis. And in this case, I might want to generate a particular infographic associated with that. And I can do that. I can take all of my data and put it back into another system, like Insights. So in this case, I've taken all of that information, pushed it into Insights using the clusters. And I've enriched each one of those clusters with data from ArcGIS Online, things like our tapestry information. And now I can start to further analyze and understand what the metrics associated with that. So I can now summarize all of the locations which happen to have a particular tapestry segment. In this case, it's specific heights. I can look at the income associated with this. I can look at all of the clusters in the map and in my radial spider diagram, which are associated with that. I can generate statistical measures and matrices about that. So now I can start to see in this card the relationship between median net worth and disposable income. I can understand the relationship between different variables and different characteristics. Anytime I can choose any other variable, so I can just flick through these. So urban chic, are they different to Pacific Heights? Yes, they are. Right? They're different for lots of reasons, and there's also different correlations and relationships between these different variables. So up here, I've taken a whole range of information like household income, educational attainment, disposable income, how much they spend on retail, and built it into this grid chart. And down here is another table summarizing things like educational attainment. And what Insights is allowing me to do is to combine and overlay all of these different data sets to start to explore my data further. So what do? You know, we took some basic information, we made it much more interactive. We took a map like this, which is really dots on maps, and started to explore the data within them. Data exploration and classification that Jim showed is really about starting to discover that, to find the measures and metrics which are important to people, and to challenge some of those paradigms. If my average spend is $1.90, I can discover that in the data set, and I can measure it, but I can also start to say, look, these areas are significantly below that. Here's what my data is telling me. We can model that in 3D, in space and time, and start to understand it in a different way, in which each month can be a different layer in our space-time cube. We can put it into these different dashboards and find the interactivity between them. And we can then start to sort of think about the clustering analysis. And this is the classic workflow that I think about. You know, we have customers, they're associated with clusters. Those clusters have signal and they have noise. And what we're trying to do is really understand that and use the clusters to really identify dispersion. We can also think about cohesion, right? How much are those clusters like each other? How does one group of customers at Pacific Height relate to others in the area? What's the geographic distribution? And what's the relationship between them? And can I think about things like spend versus their tapestry segments? How do those relate to each other in terms of now being able to define new metrics? And we can put those all into different dashboards and different visualizations. So from business analysts to an infographic and out the other side into something like Insights. So all of these different tools are continually helping you as the analyst, the data consumer, the data creator or curator, really start to get more insights as part of that and find metrics that matter, right? We're constantly providing you feedback on mean and median and things like that. So these are my 5 top tips, right? Educate yourself on the data needs of your organization. Educate yourself on the way to express that data in terms of the most important KPIs. What is it that people really want to see, and how should you measure them? So think about ideas of change and ratio and relationship, directionality, how much is it changing and how quickly? Correlation and regression between data sets, collinearity, so does one data set predict another, or do multiple data sets all come together to give you a prescriptive answer? And you really need to think about consistent methods to collect and organize that data, to think about the way that you visualize information, high, low, red, green, the techniques that Jim really did a great job of showing you. And we think about all the time that less is more, that context is clarity. We don't need to give people big data. What we need to give them is small answers. Show me the places that have this behavior. Show me where opportunity is. And information is an insight. Knowing that our average spend is $1.9 doesn't mean anything unless I can say it's happening in 15 zip codes, which are all Pacific Heights, that shop on a Sunday, that use Visa and visit us 3 times a week. But there's another group that have this behavior that we should focus on. Because we're often descriptive in what we're doing, and it's far less than prescription. What we need to think about is how to use all these metrics to tell people what they should do. And lastly, what really encourage you all to do is to measure how your data is used. It's not simply about finding metrics in the data, but who is using your data, how frequently, what don't they like about what you share with them. I think Jim and I both share a pet peeve, which is, poor quality maps. And I don't necessarily make the best maps for these webinars. I'm trying to actually show you how to build better maps. But Jim is really focused on the communicative power of the right expression of answers. So you can go and explore all of the examples that we showed today. We'll send you all of this in a follow-up email, so you don't need to write these down. But we want you to start to really play around with some of this. You can go to the map that Jim showed, you can open it up, it's all public, log into your ArcGIS online account, and start replicating the work that he did. And the same thing with space-time cubes, all the way to the Insights dashboard. So one of the things we're going to, this is the upcoming webinars, we're going to sort of continue on this sort of strategy and sort of think about how to use the things we've looked at, metrics and these other activities, cluster analysis, visualization, data exploration and aggregation, to look at minimizing your risk when you put these strategies into place. And that's next month. November, we're doing it a little earlier to actually start to look at benchmarking. So really start to think about, what are those metrics that you really care about, and how do I compare site A to B and opportunity A to B. So we'll come back to the cluster data set and many of the metrics that we've looked at over the last 2 webinars. And of course, all the information is available through LinkedIn and other assets, as Kathleen described at the start. And please, get involved in our surveys. Your feedback and your influence and your questions help us define what we're doing with our software and improve it and trying to add new capabilities that you can all use. And we can only do that if we hear your voice. And so I would love to know, do you have questions? And Kathleen's going to moderate it.
All right, so let's take a look. We only have a couple minutes, so let's do maybe one question. We can follow up with the rest of you individually if you've asked a question that we can't get to. We've kind of a long one from the audience, so let's go for it. Great webinar. In GIS, we usually look into an existing business and the customer they have or like to get. I'm working on the idea of what business would work in specific areas. So if one would want to innovate or invest, then we can demonstrate the value that can be gained. The question is, what business would work here best? I think that's more of a comment from the audience. So thank you very much for sharing that. Let's go to Helen. Could you explain a little bit more about the hotspot map that you created?
Yeah, and I actually think it's related to the previous question. There might be a question and a question. Hotspot analysis is really sort of focused on saying, based on all these different characteristics, where are the places that they cluster, and where are they statistically significant compared with everywhere else? And that's one of the real techniques that can help you with defining what businesses would work. Hotspot analysis is a form of regression, and one of the things that we support is this exploratory regression. So take 4 or 5 attributes, run them through regression, and find the places that best match those criteria or best explain the variation. So I often use regression analysis and hotspots with the sort of work that Jim showed. I'm going to ask him to comment on sort of, visualization techniques and relationships.
Yeah, what I like about hotspot analysis compared to a heat map might be best explained this way. A heat map is just kind of saying, look, there's a lot of dots here, and there's more dots here than there are in other places, and we just want to make sure you can see just sort of the spatial concentration. Hotspot analysis goes that extra step, maybe introducing an attribute like, sales or price per sale. Maybe you want to know, are there customers whose spend is significantly higher, like statistically significantly higher than just sort of observationally higher, like, oh, it looks like prices are higher there, or sales are higher there. So the hotspot analysis, what I appreciate about it is it gives you a regression-based reason, an analytic reason to say, no, these are hot spots based on actual analysis of the data, not just eyeballing it and winging it, but by our criteria, these are hot spots, and then these other areas are cold spots. We might have one strategy in an area of hot spots, and we might have a different strategy, how we market or how we price things in a cold spot area.
Yeah. It's a really important technique.
All right. That is about all the time we have for questions today. We're at the top of the hour. If anyone asked a question that we didn't get to, of course, we will follow up with you afterwards. Thank you very much, Jim, for joining us, and Helen again for conducting this webinar. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we hope to see you again for the next one.
Thanks, everybody, and goodbye.